I really appreciate the fact that you care about this, because I care about it very much. I guess for the longest time, I've felt that our discipline. I understand the need for technical sophistication. I mean, a lot of my work gets into that. But I also think, first, that it's really important to have these bridges. And it's not just important as a kind of public outreach, bringing the public into contact with philosophy sort of thing. But I think it's actually important for the way that we as a discipline think about ideas. And I'm not sure I think it's a little bit more recognized these days, but that we're not really quite there yet.
I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's part of what I've been picking up from your appearances on podcasts and definitely like the New Yorker profile. So maybe I should sort of zoom out and set the stage for the conversation here, which is, I mean, I would have loved to have you on the podcast, like regardless of sort of like the more, let's say, like popular level appearances and work and that sort of thing. But what prompted me to even approach you to ask you to be on this sort of thing was in part the New Yorker piece, the profile that they did on you. I think that was in December. And then, so I was reading that and going, well, this is so cool. This is someone I'm familiar with, and a profile in the New Yorker. And forgive me, I wasn't totally familiar on the other like popular level interest pieces that had been done on you before that. But that was the trigger. Well, and so then that was the prompt for Tim Ferriss, who I have, like I said, I've followed him for probably at least like 10 years or so, give or take. And I noticed that your name popped up in the feed and thought, wow, okay, this is going to be a very cool conversation. I can't wait. So, first question, was the picture that was in the background, was that a picture of David Lewis?
Yeah, I see. I know what you're asking. Yeah. Sorry, he's right here.
There he is. Okay, so it was like
Sorry,
the top of his head.
It's not a setup. I'm not I don't actually construct anything like. I mean, you could see the rest of my office if you wanted. It's all back through here. What I'm saying is like, yeah. So, this is. I just haven't actually managed to post it, but so it's just sitting there.
No, that's great. So you're the second person that I've talked to that has a picture of David Lewis in the background. So the first one was my friend, former supervisor Nathan Howard, who's at Toronto, and you see like David Lewis. And there's one other I'm gonna forget. But regardless, one of them is David Lewis. So it leads me to ask something about you, which is when Tim Ferriss asked you about sort of like the usefulness of analytic philosophy, or how does the average person get into analytic philosophy? It's technical, it can get very complex, and part of your answer was to reference like literature and movies to get into like as a common point for some philosophical ideas, right, and touch points. Yes. And so here's my question to you. I'm wondering how much of the aesthetic appeal to the ordinary person and that aesthetic awareness was any of that inspired by David Lewis? Because I am someone like many others who was such a fan of just his writing style. He just has, like, at least in my opinion and others as well, like this more accessible approach to talking about these very technical big questions. So I'm wondering if there was some sort of influence from Lewis because of you studying under him.
A big influence, but I wouldn't exactly put it in terms of the aesthetics. I mean, that was, I think, always part of my attitude. I would say that what I got from David was an understanding of how to capture, or the desire anyway, to capture a kind of deep complexity using like not simple, but like precise, like trying to use precise prose and carefully framing and talking about an idea in a way that, where it's like the surface of the pond seems kind of still, but underneath there's a current going. And so, because in David's later work, most people probably don't notice this, but like his early work was full of symbols and his later work isn't. I mean, he hardly uses any kind of formal formalism in anything kind of, after the second half of plurality. And the reason for that is because I've always agreed with him and always thought this, is that felt that like when people use very formal presentations, it's often a crutch so that they don't actually have to do this work of figuring out how to say the idea precisely in prose. And if you can't say it precisely in prose, often, even if you get like that, you can define what you want to do formally. There's a kind of disconnect between the ordinary way we think about things and the way that we kind of represent the idea, and what you're saying philosophically. And of course, Lewis was also really committed to kind of capturing the way we understand the manifest and common sense. And so he actually had a methodological commitment that I don't think arose for him until basically, I think until, like, as I said, he worked through plurality in the mid 80s to this, but then he really tried to put it into practice. It's not that he didn't use formalism; he certainly did, and a little bit of formalism is great. But his early stuff is presents very differently, even though some of it is like this, even less well worked out than his later stuff in terms of the complexity of the philosophy. And he explicitly said that to me. Like he was like, I think you should, he said, I think there's value in doing this. And I was like, yeah. And so I have been, yeah, you know, following my teacher.
I think part of what is so interesting about you and your work is that, and I said this to Jill Russell as well, because I really like her writing style as well, and is that you seem to have both an interest in both sides, like a literary side and then sort of like the scientific mathematical side. And it was especially interesting. So you mentioned that one of the first philosophy books that was recommended to you was Heidegger's Being and Time, which when
Mm-hmm.
I heard that, again, that it was new information to me. And for me, that almost drove me away from the discipline. So, it's sort of it's quite a different starting point, obviously, from where you have ended up, just in terms of, publications and writing style and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, like, what was how did that, first of all, did that appeal to you, Heidegger's Being in Time, because it's a very different kind of philosophy that
Yeah.
than you ended up with. And if it did appeal to you, like, what did appeal to you, given that it's so different in its methodology?
Well, the style of writing and the method didn't appeal to me at all, but the ideas really appealed to me. Um, And when I read Being in Time, there was a professor, Quentin Smith, who I was reading it with, and I could just go and talk to him really, about the whatever, however much I had read, and he would sort of translate it for me. And whether or not, ultimately that was a successful translation, I didn't feel, if I'd been reading it by myself, I probably wouldn't have gotten too far. Because I don't like the method and I don't like the style of writing. I mean, I struggle with a lot of continental philosophy, both more contemporary work and also the phenomenology of the early 20th century, for that reason. But I think some of those ideas are just really, there's a lot of really important, interesting insights to be found in. In fact, I'm going to teach a class in the spring, a graduate seminar with my colleague Paul Franks, where we're going to cover some Husserl and some Kierkegaard and other things, for me, as an opportunity to kind of get more into those thinkers, um, with an expert, but kind of using my analytic point of view. So, I mean, my undergraduate background was in natural science, and I found phenomenology, like, continental phenomenology, impenetrable in some ways, but really moving and meaningful and important. And then I found analytic philosophy to be clear, although difficult, especially because it took a long time to learn the terminology, but also kind of, I don't know, I found some of it quite superficial, and I've gotten better at, I've gotten, the more I learn, and I feel like I'm still really learning a lot, the more I'm able to see deep, the importance and the depth of many of the questions. But certainly when I first got to it, um, I did not. So there's like a, or people writing stuff because they can make a contribution and they have to publish or whatever. And I get that. But, but there, yeah. So I guess you could say that I think what I love about philosophy, and there are many different ways to make contributions, but what I love about philosophy is trying to find out, the answers to these kinds of very deep metaphysical questions. Fundamentally, it's about the metaphysics, but the metaphysics also brings into account like the way that we experience ourselves in the world. So there's the continental philosophy. Like being in the world is absolutely my concern. um, that's why now I've been doing quite a bit of work basically with say computational cognitive scientists and others, and I've learned quite a bit about the way the mind meets the world, both from a scientific perspective and then also in philosophy of mind and metaphysics and epistemology.
You also mentioned that you like existential philosophy, and I think I'm resonating with a lot of what you say as well, because the big questions and sort of the, let's say, the philosophical questions that maybe a lot of people resonate with when they are first getting into the discipline, I think
Mhm.
are typically reflected in that sort of field. But then maybe there's some language that, I don't know, like you said, can be impenetrable. But I'm wondering, so from your perspective, existentialism in particular seems to have an outsized impact with people in like outside the profession, right? The ordinary
Mhm.
person. And I'm wondering if you thought about why that is, because it's not as if it's this huge sort of subfield within philosophy. It definitely
Mhm.
has its, um,
Mhm.
I don't know, place in the field at
Mhm.
large. But when you
Mhm.
compare it to other fields, at least inside the profession, it seems like it's
Yeah.
small relative to its impact out there. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what is hit in the culture where there's existential film and
Um,
existential.
right. Yeah, I mean, as I'm not such, I mean, for me, it's more like phenomenology rather than existentialism. But
Hmm.
I think one of the things is that like existentialism, or at least sort of the Kierkegaardian version of it, there's just so much, like it's just such a kind of pure expression of a kind of confusion that I think many people experience. Like it just, so it might not be that there's a huge amount that you can do with it downstream, but it kind of just really captures um, um, something about the unintelligibility of being in the world. And so people are like, yes, this is identified um, a question that I have or a kind of puzzlement that I experience. And so they resonate with it, basically. And I will say, I think in my own small way, the work on transformative experience has also seems to capture something that resonates with people, and that's why people find it like they're interested in it, and I think this is where like contemporary philosophy as we practice it, the very kind of analytical one, like we haven't done a very good job of finding things that resonate with people, even though there are so many things that we do that really should resonate with people. And I don't, and that said, it's not like it's super easy. So, I say we haven't done a very good job. It's not like, oh, well, if we just did this, it would be fixed. No, I don't think it works that way. But, but, um, but I do think we could do it as a discipline a better job of sort of recognizing again these this challenge.
It reminds me of your personal experience of getting into philosophy in the first place, where at least, correct me if I'm wrong in this account, but when you were initially taking courses as an undergrad, you were going, "This is not for me," and
Mhm.
maybe there's a period where you sort of bailed, but then had this moment where you were like, okay, but look, I am interested in these sorts of things, maybe not this iteration. Or like, how would you describe that moment for you, and like what turned you off initially and then kept you going?
I mean, I never bailed. I just felt like every time I tried, I got sort of rebuffed. Um, and The problem was, I mean, partly that, I mean, I don't think I really even knew what philosophy was. So I'm not really sure how I convinced myself that I knew what I wanted to do, but I somehow did. And then just felt that, oh, well, I didn't take the right class, or that teacher wasn't really getting what I was trying to do, or you know, didn't really care. Well, certainly it was certainly the case that one of the classes I took, the person who was teaching the class like could care less about their teaching. Like they were a terrible teacher and they could care less about it. And so that was apparent to me. And so I didn't take any lessons from it other than, well, I guess I'm not going to take this class. Um, uh, and my parents didn't want me to be a philosopher. So I was just dealing with this kind of, I was like resistance on all sides. But that's never stopped me yet.
In listening to your personal stories, I get the sense that you are like, at least since middle school, maybe before, you had just been thinking about these sorts of things as part of your who you are, your disposition,
Yeah.
and the sort of life iterations of the undergrad course and, like, this school or whatever. Those were like almost incidental to the undercurrent, which is you were already thinking about these sorts of things like all the time. And it's
Yes.
just a matter of like, how are you going to enter the stream that more personally resonates with you and where you can sort of like develop your gifts? Is that fair to say?
That is completely right. And the naivete of, and I think back, I was like, okay, I'm going to go do analytic philosophy. I'm going to go to Princeton. I'm going to take classes there. I'd never even heard of David Lewis before I got there. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to study with David Lewis. He's great. I really, we really connected. And then and then I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to explore the questions I want to do on my own terms. And I cannot believe I thought that was possible. Um, as it turned out, it was possible, but I think it took an awful lot of luck and an awful lot of work. Like I can't even believe it's worked out. Like I can't believe now because I can now explore the things that I want to explore on my own terms, which is in a very analytical way. Um, um, but like the hubris is incredible. Like it was just kind of naive again. Like well, I always did well when I was in high school and college, so I'm sure I can do this now if I just try hard enough. That's basically, I think.
It sounds like it was a condition though for you to really put yourself out there and get into that, right? I wonder if you had known what you're getting into. I just wonder if you would have taken the same path.
I don't know if I would have. I mean, if I had known the true chances of success, and but it's very hard. Okay, now we're going to get into theory because the problem is with all of this, it's not clear how much kind of hindsight reasoning one can do because, okay, so when you're engaged in a process of epistemic transformation, which is what graduate school and becoming a philosopher involves, it changes your mind. So it's not just that you're discovering like what it's like to be a philosopher or whatever. Like your mind is being trained in a certain way, and that affects your preference structure. And so there's no way to kind of step outside of that process. Like you're contained within it mentally. So I couldn't have thought my way through this process and then kind of assessed it before I got in to make a decision about whether I would want to do it because I didn't have the kind of mind I needed to be able to assess it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I love that a lot of what you mention in these sorts of conversations is taken directly from more of your academic work, which speaks to its applicability. And again, like you have the technical side, obviously, that's going on, but there is that accessibility of just the basic thoughts, and that comes through in the book, but also your work.
Well, yeah, and I think now I now am really trying to kind of force myself. I've been working on a second book now for quite a while, and it's getting close to being done, and I'm very happy with it. But the task I have set myself is partly to engage with what I think is the real kind of metaphysics and epistemology, um, underlying transformative change and um, the way that we have to manage ourselves in the present with respect to our past and with respect to our future and with respect to all the possibilities that we confront. And I want to do that. If I cannot, I have to be able to do it in a way where a non-philosopher, a smart, educated non-philosopher, can understand. Um, that's the goal. And
Yeah, which is
you know,
extremely difficult.
It's yeah, and I there's a real chance I won't
Yeah.
succeed, but that's my goal. I want to go back to the literature point, which is not so much literature. So a lot of what I'm doing now, it really connects to science fiction. So as a metaphysician, so I took David Lewis's time travel class back in the day, and I loved the way that he put things together. And so since then, several times I've taught classes in metaphysics where I'm trying to engage with what I think some of the deep I think some good science fiction, not all of it or whatever, really engages with deep human truths, like the truths of ourselves as human beings, as immersed in this kind of grand external world. And and then the challenges in the class is to have people read some of these things or see a couple of films or whatever, and to connect that then with the kind of very careful, precise way of framing things, like how we're going to understand ourselves as persisting through time, or what it could mean to think about other possible worlds and counterfactuals and breaking counterfactuals, and whatever, lots of things to say about being able to imagine yourself as another person, that kind of thing. And so I'm I realized that anyone, I don't think there's in the field, someone has, like, people have not written books where they draw on this kind of insight, the way that metaphysics connects with certain kinds of science fiction, um, in the way that I would like to see it discussed. So the book also has a lot of that, just to like where it's not the metaphysics of the
That's
matrix or time travel. I'm excited about it. Like it's about like weaving together these ideas that I think are independently motivated, and showing how certain kinds of ideas from the film Memento, or um, various kinds of time travel stories, are actually connecting to both what, like, these questions, like these basically existentialist themes, I suppose, like how we understand ourselves, or continental themes, how we understand ourselves in time, how we understand ourselves relative to possibility. um, yeah. Anyway.
I love that. I mean, I so we could do a whole episode on the book coming out, and also how you were able to sort of in your writing style accommodate. So maybe for another time. But I do want to pick up. So it sounds like to me that you're sort of intentionally this professor who you didn't have when you were in undergrad. Like, you're sort of becoming the professor that you wish you had. And so you mentioned, like, you went to a big state school. Your philosophy professors were not as interested in teaching maybe as they should be, or as you wanted to, and even the TAs as well. And this
Mm,
is something that I think about quite a bit, just the, let's say, environment and climate for students, given the, let's say, intense emphasis on research, and maybe, at least in some contexts, the undervaluing of teaching in the
mm,
classroom, and how
mm,
different those are. So I'm wondering,
mm,
like, how can we fix that problem? And that's a huge question, and I'm not laying all the
mm.
responsibility on you. But do you have any ideas of how to at least take steps to, yeah, trying to fix this problem of research gets the marquee, and I'm a huge fan of research, but that
Mm.
teaching gets undervalued in a lot of contexts. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, and I would connect this to the great problem that we face right now with AI, and even, you know, basically all of a sudden now, all basically pretty much all the students are like using AI to complete their written assignments, and we've been given no. I'm still astounded by the fact that universities haven't, like, they're just like, okay, no, like, the burden is just left to a bunch of individual professors. Like, it's sort of ridiculous that there was this huge change, and the universities have just like avoided it. It's not like there are no good solutions, right? No one's even really come up with any. And I mean, um, so okay, so here we are as individuals, and we're left with either find a way to teach our students with AI, or you know don't teach them in any meaningful way, like, let them just use AI to answer all their questions. Um, so, I mean, if it's fixable, and I don't know practically if it is fixable, I think. the first thing is I think we're all being expected to do way too much. Okay. Like, and I think, I actually think we should be able to publish less. And not only should we be able to publish less, but we should um, like not have so many kind of, you know, endless assessment tasks. Like, you know, I shouldn't be asked to referee 100 papers a year, and I am absolutely asked to referee that many papers a year at least. I shouldn't be asked to write tenure letter, the number of tenure letters I'm being asked to, you know, like all of this stuff, right? And so we've just got too much. And so if doing less research, like just in terms of the numbers also, and also doing less kind of busy work. None of this is practically possible because all we're doing is getting more and more busy work as companies find ways to kind of offload what they used to pay staff for to like onto the individual. Um, and also with the teaching. So just to get back to, if we had like, if when I'm not feeling so overwhelmed, that's when I can teach the way that I want to. And often I can't do what I want to do with the students because I'm just too exhausted. It's not about not wanting to do it. It's just not about, it's about not being able to do it. But one semester I taught a class, I taught it at UNC actually. It was a big class and I had these, my TAs were great, but I just, for various reasons, I wasn't writing that much that semester, and I just really enjoyed the class. And there was we did a lot of stuff. It was, even though it was a big class, like we did a lot of, I don't know, engaged activities. Like we had a debate, like the entire class had this debate. I remember one of the things I did is on Halloween, I showed up. I actually got like a professional costume designer. I showed up dressed as Aristotle, and I walked in, and my TAs didn't recognize me. They thought I was some weird person coming off the street. I walked down, like there was this big bull, and I like walked down, and like it was the beginning of class, and people were like, first no one knows me, and then people were like, who is this person? I went down to the very center, picked up the microphone, and said, like, I think I said something like, so Professor Paul can't be here today, so I, Aristotle, have come to teach you. And they just loved it. Like it was just, I mean, they knew who I was immediately when I started to speak. And then we were covering, you know, something about like Aristotle's metaphysics, so it worked out. And like just stuff like that, and they were all so engaged. The TAs ended up printing up a special T-shirt they called like the class Plato's Academy. Like that was great. Like that was the kind of thing that I'd love to do all the time. But you can't do it all the time if you've got a gazillion other things to do. So, um, and so if you can, if, and that would mean like more creatively, like if we were able to spend time with students, just really talking with them, like teaching them how to think and you know, without, and that's the only way that, given now all the AI tools, that we're going to be able to kind of train their minds, aside from giving them in-class exams and in-class writing assignments, which also we can also do. But at some point, then they're just going to be in class writing all the time while we kind of stand around and proctor them. And that's not teaching either.
You, in the New Yorker piece, there was I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Like, what was behind this quote? You said philosophy tends to attract people who like being detached from ordinary life,
Mm.
and I'm wondering what you had in mind. If you have in mind like people in the profession who sort of by necessity have to be detached from ordinary life to do the scholarly thing and to publish as much as they need to, or if you had something else in mind, because I do see that there's a lot of people who get attracted to philosophy who actually are, you know, sort of maybe that doesn't fit as much. So I'm wondering like what you had in mind.
Um, well, what I probably had in mind, the you know, Alice Gregory and I talked for like 4 years before that piece was written. So I know I don't remember exactly what the context was, but um, my thought is actually that if you want to be a philosopher, you have to be able to kind of step back. Okay, so you have to want to be able to step back, and it's almost like, you know, and you know, it's the quasi scientific point of view, and be an observer both of yourself and other people, and kind of observe your own mind and try to observe, you know, to the extent that you can, the minds of others. And I think that's right. Now I would say that I think our field sometimes takes that too far, and that's why I say no. You know, it's like we have to be able to do that, but then we should be right back in there and immerse ourselves and pay attention to the first person perspective, right? So I do think it attracts people who tend to step back, um, in that detached way. And that's really good for analyzing and criticizing and thinking. It's not really good if you can never kind of depart from that perspective, right? Um,
So I'm wondering, what is your fatigue level for talking about transformative experiences? I mean, it seems like in the past, however many years,
yeah.
that's the thing. And so, in not knowing the answer to this question, I can imagine where you're like, look, sort of like typecasting. It's like, I'm interested
Mm-hmm.
in other things, you know, like I'm,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time, it is such a, I don't know, like it doesn't seem like there's a real, you know, answer. It's not like we've arrived at, okay, now we got it and we can move on,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a perpetual question. So where are you today with that?
Um, well, in one sense, I'm like, hey, I'm interested in other things. But in another sense, I mean, there's just a lot. What for me has been really helpful is that there's a lot of depth actually to the problem. So um, I think that so again, this is why I said, like, I've just been working on this other book that's all about the metaphysics and the epistemology here, not because I want to talk about transformative experience per se, but because I'm really interested in what are the other kinds of questions that I feel like I'm unearthing um, as I think about this. So on the one hand, there's a lot of depth to the problem. Like even understanding what the problem is has taken me a really long time, and I think I'm really only really kind of getting it now. And I could say more about that, but and then but through really getting it now and grappling with it and having to talk about it with lots of people, both philosophers and non-philosophers, and then also the fact that it seems to kind of like there seems to be this kind of it has these transfer properties. So there's like an application with psychedelics. There's an application with like AI alignment. There's an application with like Alzheimer's and in general, like kind of questions about dementia. There was an application like with the pandemic and the kind of change that happened there. Never mind, I think the kind of very personal, individual things about like having a family, or I think getting divorced is like that. And I went through a divorce, and I was like, whoa, here's a whole so so because there are all these sorts of somewhat different but still the same iterations of the problem of just going through transformative experience, setting aside the decision making part, which is I think the less interesting element actually. Um, it I haven't kind of worked through it all. And forcing myself to kind of go through it from all these different angles, especially because I've had so much great interaction and criticism, sometimes getting straw man, that's not really very fun, but true real criticism, good criticism where people understand the view and they challenge me and they have things to say, or people who are developing the view in totally different ways I'd never thought of. I love that. Like I'm perfectly happy and pleased to have uh good criticism where people see the point of the project and then want to argue with some part of it, or because then it just makes everything better. So yeah, so I don't know, I don't want to like just say the same old thing all the time, but I don't feel that I'm actually in that space right now. So, um, yeah. And there's a whole side of things that has hardly had any development at all. And that's this question of like the self rebuilding and revelation and epistemic development that happens after transformation. Um, my own work has not really developed that, and I haven't really seen other people develop that either. And um, I'm it's a project for me for sure. Once I get through this other part that I'm thinking about.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you're not like, look, I've said everything that I'm going to say about it. Sounds like there's a nice balance. I So maybe to preface this next question, I should say there are parts of the philosophy profession that I love, and then there are other parts of the philosophy profession that I don't love as much or don't love at all. And
Yep.
when I read about let's say like your when you were thinking about this initially, when I read about your sort of hesitation and fear of even working on this in an academic setting.
Mm-hmm.
Fear in terms of like how is your career
Mm-hmm.
going to be affected? How is the
Mm-hmm.
guild going to accept this sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
um, it got me sort of like, that's a frustration point. That's sort of like an anger point. I'm like, what does that say about the philosophy profession that you couldn't bring up motherhood and babies? I mean,
Yeah.
uh, to an outside observer, that would maybe sound a little insane. Maybe we come to expect it in academia, but I don't think we should. So like, that's my question to you, is like, what does it say about the field of philosophy that would even enter your head as like a point of hesitation?
Okay. So I want to say, I think through this first on the negative side, right? I'll say something about that, but I want to say something on the positive side. Let me start with the positive side. So, because even though I really did think I was probably gonna like drive a nail into the into my coffin or whatever. Just sticking with vampires indirectly or whatever. I still like that was just not the experience I had. I certainly have
Yeah.
had some pushback. I certainly have had some pushback, and I certainly continue to get pushback. There's definitely people that just hate the whole topic and don't want to talk about these kinds of questions, don't see them as valuable. um, but most of the field is not like that. So there I was afraid that it was all going to be over, and that was just not the experience that I had, and I certainly have had not that, and have had anything but that experience ever since. So and I think even people who were like, ew, I don't want to talk about something like transformative experience and babies, have kind of gotten over it, and they're like, people have just been great, like totally great. And so yeah, so I want to be more I want to say, look, so what does it say about philosophy that even if there was that attitude early on, like it's not there anymore? Like, you know, it, and other topics have also, I think, become more accessible and more allowable, and I think that's great. I think our field has morphed in a really positive way, and I especially see that with people in younger generations, like people younger than my cohort, basically. And I think it's very cool. It's maybe a little, I see maybe a little less of that with older generations, but they grew up in a different time. So,
That does make sense.
well, I want to say something negative too, but I mean, I think it's thrilling in a certain way that I could go in and say this stuff, and that people like took it serious. I didn't get like laughed off the stage or forced out or anything like that. Okay, so awesome. Now, what does it say that I was so worried about that? Well, I know what the 80s and 90s were like in philosophy, and I wasn't wrong. I saw a lot of bad behavior, um, and I think it was just like, I think honestly, like just some of it came from a certain kind of insecurity, like because we don't have any empirical results, so it's all about like who can talk the best and make who can be taken seriously, and ideas matter, and having really good ideas matter, but there was also a lot of swagger and a lot of kind of showboating, um, and I think maybe it got a little out of hand, but and it was obviously um, I think some of it was a reaction. So at the time, I'm thinking in the 80s and 90s, when complit was reigning, like was really important. Like, there was this kind of anti-analytic philosophy push. And I think as a discipline, or we felt kind of threatened and had to sort of show how tough we were in some ways. And also, there was a lot of really, really good and important work done in logic and language. I mean, and it was really important to do that work. And some of that work wasn't very amenable to the sorts of questions that I want to think about. And so I don't know. So I sort of get why certain topics were not appreciated. I do think that there was a lot of aggression in the field, and maybe again a bit of insecurity, and that's why people weren't really willing to take, shall we say, everyone's contribution at face value. But it seems to have gotten a lot better. I think it's gotten a lot better.
Good. Yeah, that's good to hear. And that's, I mean, since I wasn't doing the same sorts of things at that time, it's my
Mhm.
general impression, just based, anecdotally. So that's positive. I want to ask, there was something that you mentioned in the interview with Tim Ferriss. So you joked with him that because you specialize in these big life choices,
Mhm.
that you're sort of tempted to like hang a sign and let people know and get the word out and just go,
Yeah.
hey, I'm kind of here,
Yeah.
and if you're going through something, like, I've thought a lot about this sort of thing. And I know that it was in the context of sort of like a joke, but I'm wondering if that's so crazy of an idea for the philosophy profession. To I know that there is, so I even looked this up. There is some sort of, like, in my sense, it's a smaller community of like philosophical counseling. But
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you see a place for that sort of thing, given
Mhm.
your experience and your work. Is there something to that though?
Oh yeah. I mean, there is something to it. I mean, part of me would love to do it, although it would take too away from my. I don't have expansive amounts of time, and I'm trying to write. But um, I I guess I always thought the phrase philosophical counseling isn't. Maybe that's a. I don't know if I really like that phrase. Mostly because I feel like what I could do, or what some of us can do, is help think through conceptual frameworks, right? So it's like it's more like philosophical CBT or something, you know, where cognitive behavioral therapy, where um, I mean, I right now so right now I live in New Haven, but but I have a place in Ridgewood, New York. And that's exactly, there, or in Brooklyn or whatever. That's exactly where you could totally, like, on a Sunday, say transformative experience, like, here's or I always thought, look, bring me along to your psychedelic thing, and if you want to talk about the nature of reality, here I am. I'm officially a metaphysician with expertise in how we understand ourselves in time and possibility, and, oh, by the way, and also epistemic and personal transformation. So, Silicon Valley, bring me out.
Yeah. That's hard to fit on a
Yeah,
sign. I'm picturing like Lucy from the Peanuts, and that'd be a
exactly.
very like long sign. But I get the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess if my professor job doesn't work out, that could be my that could be my side hustle. That Yeah, I could totally do that as a side hustle, actually. Um,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's an idea worth thinking about. I mean, it requires probably more, um, like, I don't know what, administrative skills and time for sure, and sort of entrepreneurship with a commitment to that particular idea,
mhm.
than I have. But I mean, I paused when you said that because I think there's something to this actually. Like,
Mhm.
if people,
Oh yeah.
I don't know if there's a market for it because the demand might be zero, but um,
Yep. Well, I mean, and here's the thing. So people use ChatGPT for this kind of thing, but ChatGPT or any of the chatbots, they're just not that good at this. And they can give you ideas, and they kind of present it as though it's good, but they're just not. It's just not that good. And people seem to want that, and they're happy with that, I guess, because it's free, so it's like better than nothing in some ways. Um, but I do think there's a desire for it. Whether or not people would pay for it is another thing. But I appreciate the thought. Like, I need somebody to go in it with. Okay, so someone should go into this with me.
I'm all for it. I'm on board as much as I can help, if that's
Thanks.
worth anything at all. Well, so on that point, I mean, we talked about education, and I'm wondering. So when you co-wrote the article "Transformative Education,"
Mm-hmm.
did you change your pedagogy? Like, did that have rippling effects into how you teach either undergrads or how you supervise doctoral students, graduate students?
Um, I don't think so. I think it more just sort of reflected how I think about like how I had, I mean, not so much. I would say it gave voice to a way that I mentor some of my students. That's the way that I would put it. And actually, it's interesting that that article has had much more of an impact than I ever expected it to in the philosophy of education. Like which is great. I mean, I think it's awesome. And Yeah, so I don't think I changed anything. I think it was rather I'm saying I was describing for me how I thought about what I actually do.
One of the themes, again, you please feel free to correct me, but it seemed like for the longest time, and we've touched on this, that you at least had a perceived sense, rightly or wrongly, that you were sort of from middle school, from high school to college, maybe like sort of on the outside, or at least different
Mm.
from some of your peers. And it
I
was
think that what you're
fascinating
looking
to
for
hear
a
and read
weirdo
about.
is, I think is the.
No, I mean, look, if that's the case, then I count myself one as well, because for sure, I mean, what context have I not felt that way? I can't think of one, to be honest with you. Um, and so maybe this is I don't know what kind of question this is, but I guess part of it is, kind of an outsider. But look, at least from an outsider to your life, you, to me, like if there was ever an insider in
Mhm.
philosophy, I would put you near the very top. So I'm wondering, like,
Mhm.
do you feel that? Do you recognize that as your position now,
Mhm.
or is that still something you're sort of wrestling with?
Oh no, I think I was very much an outsider and very much on the fringe for a long time. Um, but it was like, but part of that was because I was thinking about these questions and in a less articulate form than eventually I was able to come up with. And I just felt alienated from the philosophy profession because I remember I remember I've had so many conversations with professors and things when I was a graduate student, and after that, where I realized there was a bit of a disconnect, and certainly before I got into philosophy, then the whole the social world, I felt alienated from in many ways, just intellectually. But first, when I started studying with David Lewis in particular, we really connected intellectually. Like he was such a friend, and like I was like, oh, this is a person for me. The same was true of Quentin Smith, who was my first philosophy teacher, and so I found these points where, um, and interestingly, David Lewis also often felt like an outsider. And for many years he was in some sense because he was developing, like he was working in metaphysics when metaphysics was just not as respected as it is now. He was always respected, but people didn't, you know, they thought that the idea of like, a plurality of worlds was, bizarre, and that his views were weird, and I don't know. So he always interestingly felt like very, I think intellectually, like an outsider, at least until the end, close to the end of his career. And so I connected with David, and so I didn't feel like an outsider then at all, because even if there weren't that many of us that had this kind of intellectual connection, there were some. So that was the first thing. And then when the TE stuff really started to kind of catch on, which was pretty fast, I think my feeling of kind of being a little bit alienated from my profession changed. But that's because I had this earlier hubris thing where like I'm going to change what my field is willing to talk about, um, even if it scared I was scared to death of doing it because I thought that the more likely response would be that I would just be thrown out of the field or rejected or made fun of or kind of somehow pushed to the fringe. So yeah, I don't feel like an outsider anymore. Just because someone like me like banging on the door so hard that you can't ignore it, and then I force my way in, and like here I am, and now now I'm inside, and I'm happy about that.
So the question was partially prompted by, it just struck me when I think it was I could get this wrong, but I think it was Jonathan Schaffer who was talking about, before all this sort of blew up,
Mm-hmm.
that you were talking about how, like, your articles weren't cited as much
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I can totally understand that. You're going like, look, and the analogies are all great. It's like, you were sort of, the analogy is like you were in this crowded space, in this crowded room, and there were a bunch of philosophers, and like no one was talking to you. And like,
Yep.
man, I mean, just the profession itself, I think, has a lot of those moments for a
Yep.
lot of the people in the
Yep.
profession. And so that's partially
Yep.
what prompted it, is because I think that is, I mean, how many people go through that sort of same experience?
Yep.
I think it's pretty
Yep.
common.
I think it is really common. I think it's really unfortunate. And just to give you a bit of context, I was doing metaphysics. I had published articles in Noose, um, JPhil, I don't know, a couple of like a bunch like a book with OUP. Like I was doing all this stuff, and so I was doing all the publication, and and I was watching my like people in my cohort. I was watching male philosophers in my cohort. They would write something and it would just get picked up. And then I would see myself and some of my the female members of my cohort, and we talked about this. I'll just be frank. And what we did wasn't picked up. The only way it would get picked up is if we talked about a male philosopher's ideas. But like we were not allowed to have a seat at the table, is the way to put it. And I was just part of that. Like, so I was not the only one experiencing it. Many people experienced it in many ways, but there was a particularly gendered element to women in metaphysics at that stage. And I think some of that changed because then social ontology became a thing and like other stuff. So, and I just think the profession has gotten better, but hasn't gotten totally better in metaphysics, I would say. So yeah. But absolutely, it's a little bit like when I was a grad student wandering through. I'm old enough to have gone to the Smoker, and like wandering through this, horrible ballroom with bad lighting, and there were table after table of like people, and everybody knew each other, and nobody knew me, and nobody wanted to talk to me because I was just some random, grad student who had no power or presence in the profession.
I think that's really important. It's not often said within our profession, and talked about. Lori Paul, thank you for the time. I just could not appreciate it more. Thanks for what you do, and for the time today. It was yeah, it was great to hear both the academic side and sort of the popular liberal side. So thank you.